My name is Justin Gage, and you're tuned in to the Aquarium Drunkard Transmissions podcast with your host, Jason Woodbury.
Thank you for joining us once again here on Transmissions. I'm so glad to have you here. So glad to be here today with my guest, Chicago's Angel Bat Dawid. She is a composer, a clarinetist, a poet, and a vocalist, and she's one of the shining stars on the great International Anthem label, where she's put out some incredible records, like the recent album Live with her band Tha Brotherhood, as well as Oracle, the incredible Transition East single. She's always got a ton of stuff coming out, and she plays with other groups as well. She's featured very prominently on the new Damon Black Monument Ensemble album Now, and I highly recommend checking that out. She joined me to discuss record collecting and the influence of Sun Ra, her history with music and religion, creative practice, race, and a lot more. We like to have fun on this podcast, but Angel took things to another level with this playful and deep-reaching talk. I'm very thankful to her for doing so. It kicks off before we were sort of officially recording, but luckily she was already recording her end, and so you get a little bit of a spiel that she introduced the talk with. It's really, I hope you enjoy it. But before we get into that, I'll mention, of course, that Transmissions is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. So if you want to get some cool stuff, our new print journal is well underway, plus bonus audio and radio shows and a lot more mixtapes, stuff you're really going to want to hear. Head over and check that out. And if you want to support Transmissions even more, you can rate and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and please do click that share button. As always, you can find my contact info at Aquarium Drunkard, so drop me a line and let me know what you're thinking of the show, what you'd like to hear more of. I always love hearing from you all. So you're tuned in to Transmissions. Here's my conversation with Angel Bat Dawid. I'll speak with you more on the other side.
If you habitually have a platform that tells you that whatever you got to do has to be in a minute, why did they do that? Why? Yeah. Why did they even think of that? Like, they specifically made it a minute, and now all of us can't really hold our... Because I used to read so many books, you know? Of course. I would read books for hours, you know? And now it's just like, I find myself like, okay, I'll read like a chapter or two, and then I'm like grabbing...
Oh, yeah. Your phone. You're scrolling. I do the same. Yeah.
They got us, man. So that's why it's important that if we're going to be in this, it's not about shutting it down. It's like, no. How do we preserve our humanity in this? It's a rhetorical question.
Yeah.
But it just has to sit there in your mind at all times.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, are you recording on your end?
Yep, I'm recording.
I am too, so we'll just dive in if that sounds good to you.
Dive in.
All right. Angel, thanks so much for taking the time to join us here on Transmissions. I'm so glad you're feeling better. We've corresponded a little bit. You had to deal with the virus a couple months back, but how are you feeling these days?
I am feeling so much better, like for real. I'm feeling back to myself, and that is largely due to the community of the world and my friends. I had so many loving messages and prayers and positive vibrations sent my way, and that is why my recovery has been phenomenal. I feel even stronger than I did before.
That's wonderful to hear. I know that, for me, your records were such a huge part of getting through the last year. that when I saw that you weren't feeling well and that you were dealing with that, I mean, I was immediately, wanted to type out a quick message of. It's funny, before we started getting into the proper interview, we were going back and forth about the perils of Instagram, but that was one of the good things that we can use it for, which is to connect with each other and to wish someone well, especially when, like they've given somebody who's given so much great art. So I'm glad you're feeling better and that we're able to sit down and have a conversation.
So much. That means so much to me, because the album, I made it by myself, alone in my own little world, and the fact that I shared it with the world, and people were there alongside with me, makes me feel really special and loved. And I know that's what really humanity is, that right there. And so I'm very grateful for those words. Thank you.
Well, before we get into anything too heavy, I'm curious, your Twitter bio and your Instagram bio notes that I'm going to read a quote here: a Black American, a traditional music composer, improviser, pianist, clarinetist, and vinyl addict. So I wanted to know, I know the last year has been rough on record stores, but have you had any good vinyl scores lately? Have you found any records that have been on your list in the last couple months that you might want to share with us?
Oh my goodness. When I say addict.
Yeah.
If there's a record, I have to have it. Like I worked in a record store for 4 years, and that was the best music education that I ever received. It took my musical knowledge and everything to like the upteenth level when I started really getting into vinyl. And the only thing is, when you have an addiction and your bank account don't match the addiction, that's when we get into some issues. That's when we get into major issues. And I did score something. My good friend, we have an album out. He's an electronic artist. He was like, I'm at this record store. He sent me a picture of a record by Mtume. It's called Rebirth Cycle. And it's been on my Golden Grail of lists. And he's like, yo. I was like, why you gonna send me a picture of this, man? And then I looked at it. I called the record store. It was at Reckless Records here in Chicago. And and it was like, I was like, man, I'm finna spend all this money. And the thing is, that was the last record I bought before all my downfall. So I had bought it and I was gonna go pick it up, and I couldn't because I was in the hospital. And so I ended up having them ship it. So yeah. Well, that was the last record I really, really bought, like, during this time.
When you started working in a record store, what was your life like when you started working in a record store? What was the shop that you worked in?
I worked at Hyde Park Records. It was a wonderful life. It was the best job. For real, if I wasn't performing, doing this, like, I would be perfectly happy for the rest of my life. It was the best time of my life. I'm not gonna lie, like, every day was just so dope, and all the characters that I knew, like everybody in the neighborhood, we were all friends. Like, it was a hangout spot, and I could listen to music all day long and talk about music all day long, and it was magical. I was sad that it ended because, I had to do this part of the journey, but that was a luscious, beautiful journey. I'm not gonna lie. Summers in Hyde Park, let me tell you, we had the door open. I'm playing like the best soul music you ain't never heard of in your life on a 45. The breeze is so perfect. Everyone's happy. It's all black people, and we listen to music and vibing, and that happened like 1,000 times a day. It was like magic Africa land. Like, what, like black people, we do that. We have an essence. We have this thing where, we make something a thing. You know what I mean? And it's particular to black people. And it's when you catch on to that thing, it's nothing like it. That's why everybody's obsessed with us,
I do know. What you're describing sounds incredible, and it sounds wonderful. The Brotherhood's album is recently. It's about to be out on vinyl soon. You've got a lot of stuff on the way, and I wondered, when you first started getting into music, was that physical part of it, the physical representation of the music, via either, CD or vinyl or tapes, was that always pretty important to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I went in my back and forths about it for a while because, with physical copies of your work, there's this thing with commerce and stuff like that come into play that makes that very tricky and makes you kind of question what your intent is for the physical copies. So I went back and forth with that a lot because I'm like, yeah, I do want to make money, but at the same time, something about that feel like prostitution, like that ain't what this art is about. So one of the ways that I kind of got over that is I started investigating what the word record means. It really means record, like an archive, like a timestamp. Yeah. And then I started thinking, what if Ornette Coleman never did a recording of Lonely Woman? Would my life, wouldn't that be, what if John Coltrane never recorded Love Supreme? What?
Right.
I mean, come on.
Right.
And so, when I started thinking of it in that way, that okay, this is a record and a timestamp, and yes, there is commerce and economics and business involved, but business ain't bad. Toxic business is bad. And unfortunately, the record companies and the ways that music has been done business-wise has been snakish, disgusting, and horrible. We don't got to do business like this.
Right.
We don't have to do business like this. That's one of the reasons I love International Anthem, because we don't do business. We don't do record business like that. That's not the initiative.
Sure.
We've been just as successful as any other record label by doing business in a good manner, which means that you respect the artist. This is,
right.
You respect them and you don't exploit, and you're not talking about numbers. You're talking about putting out good art.
Well, and you look at the catalog of International Anthem and the people you see, Jeff Parker.
Come on. So Junius
Black
Paul,
Monument Ensemble. Right.
Jamie Branch, the musicians on this label, and I'm not just saying it because I'm on the label. I'm I was a fan of these musicians before I got signed. It's good quality. And then I actually know these people. Ben Lamar Gay, they're my friends. And when I tell you that these people are good, righteous people too, the most loving and kind and genuine and supportive group of people, of musicians, and then you hear the music they put out and the ideas they have, it's come on, we can do this the right way.
Yeah.
And it's been working. It's given the label a lot of success because of that. And I'm saying that to encourage labels and people and everyone out there, just stop being shady. Just do right by people, and then we can all be blessed. It's so easy.
What do you think that doing right by people looks like? What is that, in terms of the ways that a label could engage with this artist in a less exploitative way? What does that look like when you sort of imagine it? Or rather, in your experience with a label like International Anthem, how has that looked? That
is a really great question. And when you asked it, the first thing that came in my head was transparency. Mm-hmm. Okay? That doesn't mean we completely understand each other, or is it problematic that you have these two white men with all these black musicians under him, some of the best musicians? Those things are apparent, and those things are problematic, but we're being transparent about them. We're being honest about them. This live album came out because I was being transparent about how I felt at a music festival with a bunch of white musicians, and I didn't see any black representation. Mm-hmm. I didn't see it. I didn't feel it. There was no acknowledgement of it, and it made me feel some kind of way. It made me feel very sensitive to anything that happened to me there. And instead of me saying, Angel, get over it, I decided to be transparent about it. I decided to be transparent so that we can have a conversation and respond to how I'm feeling in this situation. Because my feelings matter too. And if you choose to be transparent with me, then we'll mutually do it.
I think that's something that has been lacking from so many of the conversations about race and music, is everybody being willing to let their, the sort of guardrails that people put up to maintain certain power dynamics and to maintain a certain, and part of it is just because that's what people think, that's how things are done, or that to make it in the music business, it traditionally has required a pretty
required a certain kind of brutality in some ways,
brutality, so, that's a great word, yeah. It is brutal.
But at the same time, it could be, as you're describing, so much better, and it could be so much more communicative. And I think that sort of thing that you're talking about in terms of transparency and honesty, I think that now is the time for that. It feels to me like in everything, in politics, in let's be real, and let's actually talk about what's really wrong or what's really bad, And I might say something different than you, but if we're meeting halfway, I mean, that's where something can actually happen. And I feel like, for you as a musician, you employ a lot of different methods of working. You do, composing and notation and all that. You also improvise, and I wonder if for you, when you got into the world of free jazz or improvised music, when you got involved in that, did it feel to you like a representation of the way a creative partnership could work, in that when you're in that space and when you're in that zone with other musicians, it requires you being fully present in what they're doing and then them also being fully present in what you're doing? And I just wonder, when you got involved with that kind of music, did that feeling strike you as something,
Absolutely. Just as you described it, it was the missing sauce that I needed in my musicianship, because the majority of my life, I had like all these kind of confidence issues about me as a musician, very judgmental, critical. I'm like, oh, I'm not that good. All I know, all of that bull. And, it was like, and I knew how to read music. And, I was studying classical first and foremost before I was even into jazz, because jazz just seemed like that harrowing, like complex thing I couldn't get, But I was always listening to it. And the free jazz scene was what was like the sauce that I needed. Once that glued with my already kind of classical background, it was a wrap. But I really think that what the free jazz did was it freed me from those twisted ideas I had about what musicianship is. It freed me to a point where it's like, look, I'm just being me, and I just so happen to have a clarinet in my hand. I'm just being me, and I just so happen to be at a piano. I'm just being me. I just got the spirit, and I'm just being myself. And it was like, as soon as the free jazz unlocked that part of me, I don't feel like I can ever do a wrong note. I'm like, well, hey, that one was supposed to come out then. And I bless all my work, just like, the mythology tells us that when the deity created, he would look back and he would say, that was good. Yeah. Or I would say, that shit was good. And so like whatever comes out of me, I always bless it, and I encourage every musician out there, please bless all your work, even if it's not up to your standard. Just bless it. You put work into it. Yeah. It exists,
and it didn't used to. And that's something that's interesting, even if you don't love it,
I played clarinet for a long time.
Yay! So clarinet is a great instrument, is it not?
Well, it is. It's a wonderful instrument. I played it all through middle school, into junior high, into high school, and then at some point after high school, it just drifted away from me. But I remember that I love to engage with people who played clarinet. I know when you first started playing, how old were you when you started playing?
I started playing when I was 11.
Okay, so you were 11, and the stuff that, as I understand it, that you sort of first encountered was like Benny Goodman and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And that didn't do it for you so much. But I wonder, as you got involved in the jazz side of things, later, did you find any players, clarinetists, who sort of resonated with you, or was the fact that go ahead.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Don Byron. This album called Tuskegee Experiment. Let me tell y'all, Don Byron, whoo. This album, I've never, like, his tone quality of his horn, his musical ideas. It's a wonderful album. It came out like in the 90s, but he's still definitely doing music now. And then, of course, I have to add Shabaka Hutchins because everybody knows him as a tenor player. But Shabaka, from what I've known, he started clarinet, and he's classically trained in clarinet. You can hear it, So, and I think it's on his Birth of Creation album. There's this great, I think that's the name of the song. But anyway, on that album, it's a song where he's like overdubbed bass clarinets, crazy bass and clarinet all together. It is ridiculous. So, contemporaries, those are like people who I'm like, yes.
When you kind of connected with the instrument, the Benny Goodman stuff didn't do it for you so much, but classical music did, Mozart and stuff like that. How did you first encounter that music? Was it just while you were in band learning and studying?
Yeah, it was all of that. I always loved classical music, and I always loved musicals. Like, so I would always go to the library, and I would check out all the music I could, any kind of music. And so I listened to a lot of opera and classical. I was ashamed of it, too. Like, people be like, Angel, I was, because it was like, man, people wouldn't think I was cool because I like classical music. And so I wasn't feeling Benny Goodman. Because I'm like, man, because I really didn't know what the clarinet was. And I really thought that Benny Goodman was kind of like corny and whack. So, but I knew Mozart. I love Mozart because Amadeus is one of my favorite movies. And I was like, oh, Mozart clarinet concerto. You're like, yes. So I started listening to that. Because what I thought was, as a kid, to me, scales and somebody running up and down scales and doing all that, I thought that looked like some superhero stuff. And I was like, wow, I'd love to, I always thought it was cool to see the violinists go crazy, and I was like, that was the first time that I heard, I didn't know that the clarinet could go crazy like that. And it was Mozart's clarinet concerto. And I would listen to that tape in the morning. I would listen to it when I go to bed. I would listen to it like all the time, every day. I begged my mom, I was like, Mama, can you take me to the music store so I can get the printed music? I learned the music. I was just like, and it was like a video game.
Right.
All the time. My parents wouldn't let us go outside. They'd be like, no, read a book. So I'd be in the basement just going to town.
That's awesome. Your parents were Christian missionaries, right? And you spent part of your youth in Kenya? What were your years there like?
It was wonderful, magical. I know it sounds like everything in my life is magical, but I have to say it is. Like, living in Africa I'm so grateful for both my mom and my dad for taking us to Africa as children. It was wonderful. We had like all of these fruit trees around our house. All we did all day was run around barefoot, climb trees, eat mangoes off the trees, collect chameleons, and just have like these. It was like a kid's playground. You play outside all day with your friends, and it was just like we had chickens and a goat, and it was like. It was magical. And just to be in Africa, to be a little black girl, and all day, every day, my feet get to touch black African soil, that ancient, beautiful earth. You know what I mean? Like, that was a blessing from the Most High for sure.
It sounds idyllic. When you came back to America, so were you born in America? I don't want to make assumptions.
I was born in Georgia. My parents, my mom's from Georgia. My parents met in college and they got married. But my dad is from Kentucky, Louisville, Kentucky. So I was born in Georgia, but I lived in Louisville. That's where I guess would say my home base is. And then we moved to Kenya when I was 7. And then when we came back, we were in Louisville for a bit. And then we moved to the Chicago area in my teens, like around 15. So we moved around quite a lot, I guess.
That's a fair amount of moving around. But I'm curious. At some point, I read that your parents became involved in the Black Israelite movement and the sort of the Black Hebrew school of thought, and that you kept kosher and that you did all this other stuff. Was that after coming from Kenya?
That happened when we came here to Chicago. That was a Chicago thing.
Well, yeah, and I'm curious, did that inspire to some degree a shift in your own thinking about the way you could explore various, sort of traditions and that you don't have to maybe necessarily, because I'm just thinking about being the child of missionaries in a place and then sort of them going in a whole new direction, not a whole new direction, but
it was exactly what you said. It was exactly, I mean, like, for real, like, you're really good at this, because, like, that's exactly what it felt like. It felt like a shift in myself, because I was, as a child, you kind of just believe what your parents believe. You're like, okay, that's what it is, da, 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 da. And then when your parents stop believing the way that they taught you one way to believe and they're believing another way, then I'm like, there's another way? Right. It's like that was the question that started popping in my head, because I already had established that I have a relationship with God. I just do. I always have. And I don't think that's ever going to go anywhere. I like it. It works for me. So I'm not going to stop that. And so I had already had that. And I was just like, but there's all these other ways that people think about when you believe in God. And so it took me on several different pathways. And I kind of take a little bit from everything on a personal level, because I can but I can see a lot of people's logic of why they believe what they believe. And I kind of collect all the parts of that belief that are beneficial universally, You can't go wrong with that.
Yeah. I think that there's like the beauty of multiple traditions is that we get these different lenses to see things through. And then another beauty of it is that in all that diversity and all those differing things, you notice all these commonalities. And so
synchronicities, yeah.
And it really is. In both of those things are so valuable to understand that there are different ways of seeing the world and that there are shared ways of seeing the world. And I think that religion and that's one of the areas where we really get to explore that. But I read a great interview with Tone Glow that you did with Tone Glow, which is a great newsletter that I suggest everybody listening get into. But you talked about praying before you play, and I wonder if that ties into what you're talking about sort of blessing your creative endeavors.
Yeah, exactly. I don't do anything without prayer. Even this interview, I pray before I do it. Why not? See, we're all just creatures of habit. And really, honestly, religion, that word comes from the word to bind. To bind means it's like almost like a machine to help bind a habit. Like if somebody doesn't know how to walk and they put those things on their, like kids with polio, they would put those things on their legs. They needed something to kind of bind them to help them walk. But eventually, like, Forrest Gump, he eventually didn't need them, right? He ran, and because he already been bind into a habit, so now he don't need them little brackets anymore. See, that's what religion is, just the brackets, but it's not the thing. It's just there to kind of help guide you and guide you into a certain habit. Eventually, you ain't gonna really need it because you're already gonna be doing it naturally. So I'm all about developing habits. You know, like we have a bad habit called racism. All right, it's bad. It's bad. Yeah. So we have to work on, we're gonna have to bind it in something so that we can get on the pathway so that we don't do that anymore,
Yeah. I think there are stories that our culture has told itself about itself for a very long time that we are now, it's getting harder and harder to suggest that those stories are correct because we know and we see every day all these different ways that they aren't, When I think about what you're saying, religion is there's a writer I really like to engage with on Twitter, and we've spoken a lot. His name's David Dark, and he talks about how religion is what you do. It's your practice, you know? And I thought about you praying before playing or even doing an interview, which I think that's such a wonderful, and I feel so honored just to even think that, you know, a conversation.
Conversation is so important. You know, us talking together about, and the fact that you took the time, you want to talk to me about me, like I and that's why I pray, because pray is like, you don't really have to know somebody personally, but when you pray for them, you kind of instantly connect with them, and that's something. You know, we were talking earlier before we went on the air about how we're gonna have to be more intentional about being human in this world that we live in right now, and that's something that can keep you human, because we can't physically and safely be with each other. But when I take a little moment and I pray that me and Jason will have a nice conversation and that things will go well and we'll both feel, you know, I just put those positive intentions on it. It's not gonna hurt anybody, really. It's free. I can do it as much as I want. Nobody has to even know I do it. And
it's like setting the table.
Yeah. You know? So for our connection, so that we can still remain human, even though I can't physically be in your presence. You know.
Yeah. I wonder if for you, you know, obviously live music has been on hold for the last year and into this year.
I wonder if for you, the act of live music and being in a band and working together with people, and you have all sorts of groups. You've got, you know, you collaborate with people all the time. You've got your own, Tha Brotherhood. You've got a trio of all women.
Sisters of the Nitty Gritty.
Sisters of the Nitty Gritty, which I understand our past guest, Lonnie Hawley, bestowed that
Lonnie
name upon
gave us the name. I like, well, that's it.
I think about what I miss from, let's say, the religious upbringing of my own youth, and I miss the feeling of congregation, and I wonder if for you, is live music in that setting, is that the main thing? I mean, is the main draw for you when you are playing, connecting with the people on stage with you, and then how does that connect to the audience for you?
I love that you brought up congregational. That is exactly what it is. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I was trying to find a way to describe it. And it is more like, I feel like a show is like we're a congregation, because I grew up in church. All right. And I grew up in the Black church. It's different. Like if you've never been to a Black church, you will be like, man, that was a different type of church service. The music is so good. It's like the best music you ever hear in the world. Everyone's happy. You get happy. You never know what's going to happen. And so performance wise, you know, we would have like all these worship services, because I listen to a lot of gospel music too. And I remember how good that felt. And so it doesn't really matter what medium of music I'm playing in. I'm bringing that same spirit with me. Like I'm on stage and I'm just worshiping. You know what I mean? I'm just letting free music, not having any limitations on the expectation of that sound is the most free. It's like a roller coaster. You know, I was scared of roller coasters for a very long time. I would get on and I would just hold on like really tight and be like, ah! And then one day I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to lift my hands up. And if I die, well, then that's it, you know? And I did. I just lifted my hands up and I just flew with the roller coaster, and it was so fun. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then what we do, we get off and we back in line again, trying to get on again, you know? And it's the same way with like live performance. It's like throwing my hands up, like in the freeway, of like throwing my hands up on a roller coaster. And it's the wildest, most funnest ride. And if you go on the ride with me, everybody in the room could go on the ride with me too. I'm not reserving it for you just to be a spectator. Come on in. You know, like that's how the Black church is. So like if the pastor says something that you really like or resonates in your spirit, you can be like, amen. You know, like that's the kind of vibe that happens at the live performances that I do with the Brotherhood, with the sisters, with We on We, you know, like,
yeah.
It's just.
I'm curious, you at some point, started making beats and things like that in addition to playing clarinet. When did that enter your life?
That happened. So there was a time point in my life. I was in my early 20s, and I was just like unemployed. I was just not thinking good about myself. I hated my life. And I was with my folks, and my dad, he'd been working with all these great jazz musicians. I didn't know who they were. And he's like, oh, my daughter played clarinet. And so I went to one of their jam sessions, and one of the elders there, Eddie Gale, he plays guitar. He says, I think you might like this program. And it was a little music program, kind of like MuseScore, like, all those music programs. So I put it on the computer, and I started composing little stuff. I was like, oh, this is cool. And then I realized that you could, put sounds. They had MIDI sounds. I was like, oh, I can play back my stuff with different sounds. I was like, what? And there's percussion sounds. And so I started doing these little beats. And, I've always been a hip hop fan. I always listen to a lot of hip hop. I was like, oh, this is how they do production. What? This is cool. And so I started listening to a whole lot of hip hop, studying it. I would listen to beats and I would notate the beats into the program. And then I figured out a way that I could take and export that into a file. And I was like, oh, yeah. Now, and then that was early 2000s, when home studios was getting big, so I went to Comp USA or something. I bought some little cheap little $30 home recording thing, put it on there, and I started going to town. And I was like, this is cool. This is so fun. And it was my saving grace because, that was a hard time in my life. I didn't feel good about myself. And it was really I would come home from work or out. I just didn't feel good about myself. But I would go into my little closet, my little room, and I would be doing these little beats for hours. And then I started studying hip hop as an art form, because I was like, man, I wonder what it'd be like if somebody rapped on my shit. But I didn't know anybody, and I was too scared to show anybody. Hip hop's intimidating, and I'm a woman, and I was like, so I was I'm gonna have to rap on my own stuff. And so I started listening to a lot of Nas and some of the the hip hop artists that I really, really loved and respected lyrically, and I started taking their rhythms of what their words, and I started notating them. And then what I would do is I would erase their words and I would put my own, because I was nobody's gonna know that I just took but it was just a way of me to learn the rhythmic pattern, because hip hop isn't rhyme. Hip hop is rhythm. You know what I mean? It's not you have to say, oh, the cat is whack. No, the words don't rhyme. You have to be in the rhythm of the thing, and that's what makes it one of the most amazing art forms. I'm glad that that's the product of my generation. That is the product of my generation is the hip hop. And I feel as a Black artist, I need to know and have, and I didn't know that little experience that I explained to you, fast forward, is what's getting me through this pandemic,
No kidding. Do you still find that some of the techniques that you learned, do you still sample your own stuff or treat it in that sort of hip-hop inspired way? One of the things that's so interesting is, we've had Jeff Parker on the show, and he'll talk about how he just builds these whole little suites essentially the way, that you would a beat, or that's exactly what he was doing, was making this stuff on his own. Do those elements of being able to augment and retreat your stuff, does that sort of still enter into what you do musically?
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost you psychic or something, because that's the next projects that I'm coming out with are basically what you're saying. This summer I'm coming out with a trilogy set, a cassette series called Hush Harbor Mixtapes. And so it's going to be some solo stuff. It's going to be 3 volumes. It's going to be Sisters of the Nitty Gritty, and it's going to be We on We. So that's the cassette. And then in the fall, I'm coming out with Requiem for Jazz, which I'm actually doing what you're saying. I recorded Requiem for Jazz about 2 years ago at the Hyde Park Jazz Festival. And it was a production. It was everything. It was strings. It was all black. It was multi-generational. It was like the biggest production I've ever had to put together in my entire life. And I recorded it. And I've taken that recording, but I've also done what you just said, flipped it. So there's parts where it's flipped, and I've sampled my own stuff, and then it tells a story, which kind of goes into what I was saying about the Hush Harbors. Hush Harbors are what I do. They're services, congregational services, like we were talking about. You know, that was a tradition with my ancestors that they would do in their time of oppression. And so everything that I do pretty much is a Hush Harbor, from even my releases that are coming out. So... And that's what the music is. It's both elements of like that. I think maybe because I listened to so much classical music. Because one thing about classical music that I appreciated was it was never in A, B, chorus, bridge. It's like the music could go all over, like the sonata form. Like I just completed a composition, a sonata, and I really studied the form. And it's a beautiful form. It's a beautiful form about, like, you know, taking two opposing, different type of musical ideas and then working them out in a development and then coming back but changing it a little bit, you know, like instead of looking at like, oh, I'm gonna write this lyric and then it's got to go to the bit. It doesn't work. You can go into like a whole other stretch of something else that don't make no sense or context to the other thing and never go back to the other thing.
That's right.
I think that something that's so interesting about a group of a generation of jazz musicians who understood, who innately understand hip hop too, you know, because it is the music of the time, you know. It's just you don't have to even actively listen to hip hop to absorb it, you know. I think something that's so interesting is the way that you've already talked about, you know, blessing your music and treating it as something that is special. At the same time, it sounds like what you're describing is you can also do whatever with it. It's not in and of itself. The idea is what's important, and the manifestation of you making something. That's important. You can do whatever with it though. You can chop it, you can flip it, and I think that that's such an interesting and beautiful way to, it's what ties jazz traditionally to hip hop. You know, they're not different they're different expressions of the same sort of thing that I think is what you're talking about.
You hit it on the nail, and I swear you psychic or something, because with this Requiem, the Requiem is based off of a movie called The Cry of Jazz that talks specifically about, so The Cry of Jazz, I took the words from the movie and I scored it into the Requiem, because the thesis of the whole movie, now it's set in 1959, made in 1959. It is an integrated cast of young black musicians and people, black and white people, getting together, and they're being transparent. And they're talking about things like, can a white person play jazz? Is it only for black? They getting deep, and this is 1959. But his treatise, when he gets into it, he comes to the conclusion that jazz is dead. And I was like, what? And let me tell you, when the first time I saw this little obscure movie, it was like around the time that Nas's album came out. Hip hop is dead. Yeah. And I was like, what are they talking about? Hip hop's at its height. I was like, what is he talking about? 1959, that was the biggest year in jazz. Kind of Blue came out that year. Like, come on. Why is this man in this obscure movie saying hip hop? And he goes into this long, intricate details about jazz and improvisation and what it represents as a black person. The improvisation, the monotony of going nowhere. That's the loop. And I was like, the loop is the beat, like in hip hop. Boom, 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 boom. And then you have the lyricists coming over with the improvisation, freestyling. It's the same thing. Right. And so when he came to the conclusion that the height of jazz, you know, because like in the film, the first thing, there's this white woman. She's like, thanks for telling me that rock and roll is jazz. And dude is like, no, rock and roll ain't jazz. No, let me break it down to you. And they broke it down to their white friends. And I'm like, how progressive. And of course it was in Chicago. Of course it's based in Chicago.
Well, yeah. I mean, Chicago, this place where there's this history and lineage of people thinking, you know, very deeply about this stuff. I've seen scenes from The Cry of Jazz. There's Sun Ra footage in there, right?
Yes, and that's also the thing too. The special secret, not secret, but the thing that I'm most happy about is, so the score was done by Young Sun Ra. And so the finale of the Requiem, I transcribed it. And so that's Sun Ra's joint. And so Marshall Allen's going to be on this album.
Oh, wow.
Like,
how amazing.
Yeah, and I'm mixing it myself, because it was important that I have as much Black autonomy to it. So that's what I've been working on during the pandemic. I started as soon as the pandemic happened. That's what got me through just the shock and the trauma of like, oh, we're quarantined, was that I was working on this Requiem, and here it is like a year later, and I'm like, okay, I'm almost done with it. And but I had to wait a year for all this stuff. Like, I was ready last year. I was really kind of like, okay. But then it started going through all these transformations. Like, you got to take your time. I was like, and then the Marshall Allen thing, I was like, see, what if I put that? So I'm just sitting here just waiting. I'm like, waiting for all the nuggets to get together and put out all this music. So I've been busy,
Well, you have been so busy. You seem to be creating constantly. And I want to ask a little bit about a couple recent guest appearances. You're on a Barry Black song, George Floyd, and then also you're on the most recent Not Wist album, and you do the song Into the Ice Age, which then kind of segues into your friend Ben Lamar Gay singing really about the summer of 2020 on what's Black, I think it's called Black Fire is the name of his track. And I'm curious, what did last summer feel now that we're a little removed from last summer and we've got a little bit of a chance to like look back on it? What is that when you look back on it now? How does it feel to think about that time?
It feels spicy. It feels like see, I always felt like that. You know what I mean? Like, I would be like crying I had this habit that I developed that every night I would go to bed, I would watch police brutality videos. I've been doing that for a few years, and because I wanted to make sure that that my heart always still felt tender about that, and didn't feel desensitized from that, and that I still wanted to know that I cried about stuff like that. And so I would, before I go to bed, watch all that and see how so many Black people are mistreated, and then for me doing that years, and then to have this summer where it was like, oh, now everybody is forced to re-look at this, and it inspired a lot of music. With Barry Black, that was just a radio opportunity that came up during that time, and I thought it was a cool thing because they were trying to respond to how COVID is, and they were like, let's do something different, like bring these two artists together who are in different countries and have them make a track in 48 hours. That was the challenge. I was like, this is so cool. I was like, yes, let's do it. And so linked up with Barry, we automatically hit it off. We knew it was like, oh my goodness, we're about to do something cool. And he hit me up, and see, he's from Manchester, England, but that George Floyd thing affected Black people all over the world for some reason, all over the world. And he was like, Angel, I feel like we're right in the moment. We should just directly respond. I was like, that is the most appropriate and wonderful thing to do. And so to be able to be in the very moment of like when all of that was just, because it was that on top of, oh my goodness, we're in a pandemic, like some science fiction movie. It just felt like World War III, like, and to be in all of that explosive rage and have the opportunity to connect with another Black man, a Black man all the way on the other side of the universe, and us respond. It was fantastic. Do
you feel like as we've gotten farther and farther away from the summer, do you feel like people's attention is drifting away from some of the stuff that was so at the forefront at that moment? Or do you feel like what happened last summer, maybe it's both things? I hope it's both. I hope that, for the sake of optimism.
I think with humans, I just have this understanding that humans, some things become important and they stop becoming important, and people are trying to live their life, so I knew there was going to be a natural decline in the interest, but there's secret things happening, sometimes it's not supposed, sometimes it's all out in the front, And then it also means, okay, what kind of actions do we need to take? And that's why all this slowdown needs to happen in people's lives right now. Stop rushing. Stop it.
Yeah.
Slow down. Like we're going too fast. You're doing too much. Stop trying, So I think there's going to be definitely, I don't think because, Americans, that's the thing about living in another country. If you haven't been outside the country and you're stuck in an American bubble, you kind of don't see things. You don't know that, you're controlled by, whatever you see on TV. And there's certain things that people believe in this country. I'm like, you don't have to live that way or think that way. Like, for instance, why is it that it's acceptable for me to pay my bills? I gotta look at men who own slaves. That's triggering. Like, why do we act like that's normal? That triggers me. Every time I look at George Washington, I'm like, yeah, but in his mouth are the teeth of black people. Like, he literally would make dentures with human teeth. And for me to commerce, I gotta look at this motherfucker. But when you talk about it, people like you're being sensitive. Yes, I'm being sensitive because this shit is sensitive. I don't want to see that every day. And this is supposed to be the country that I'm supposed to be proud to be a part of, and I gotta see that.
I think that what you're saying gets back to that lack of transparency and lack of honesty about where things actually came from. And I sometimes wonder if maybe maybe Americans could have a better handle on their history if they were also willing to be honest about their history. I'm talking about myself specifically too, which is to say, there's an unwillingness to really grapple with the reality of what you said. When you said his mouth was full of the teeth of slaves, that puts it into a kind of that it's impossible to deny the humanity of that, and yet there's an unwillingness to engage with that because of how uncomfortable it makes people feel. It makes.
We're going to have to do it. It's like, I was talking to a friend earlier. I was like, look, you ever have a sick thought come in your head? You be like, oh my goodness, where did that come from? Look in the mirror. That shit came from you. There's no one else in your head. Oh no, I'm not racist. I couldn't be. You are though. That thought came into your head. No one is in your head. You are in there. And if something came in your head about a black person or you did something in your head, stop feeling bad or something that you thought, it's a thought. And here's the reason you have it is because it's been a habit for centuries instilled to you by your ancestors. They put it in you from birth. You keep doing it over and over and over again because it's a habit. And so you have to change your habits. You have to think another way. In order to think another way, I have to bring it up to you. So maybe you didn't know. Maybe you didn't know how uncomfortable y'all make black people feel sometimes. You're not trying to. I'm like, yeah, but that statement that you just said made me feel utterly uncomfortable right now. And I don't even know how to tell you.
Well,
your presence your presence, if I'm in a room full of black people and you come in, I feel like there's a part of me that I can't be myself sometimes. That's not your fault. That's our ancestry. That's the fact, like you said. The president that you love, like your Thomas Jefferson and them, had a whole black family that he kept hidden. Come on now, and that's supposed to be America with all these different races and people from all over the world here. No, it tells you who's in charge. It tells you that it doesn't matter if it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden in office. Those are still old white men. Then both of them grew up in an era where there was colored and white, and they benefited from that. So even though they're progressive now, and they don't think that, they grew up that way in that culture. And so there's elements of the way they think that are still there.
Well, sure. And I think that a lot of people probably thought that when we had our first black president, that it was a true signal that things had changed, but it wasn't. It was part of it, right? It it was an incremental thing. But then for the first black president to be followed by perhaps the most outspokenly white nationalist president that we've ever had. Well, that's not actually true. He's not the most outspoken white nationalist.
He's one of many, but
in recent history, you know, we hadn't seen somebody like that take over. So it's a reminder, I think, about what you're talking about, which is that those uncomfortable truths that exist at the core of our stories, I think without true examination of them and without real willingness to sit in an uncomfortable moment with a person. Like this is, like, I don't feel uncomfortable with you right now, but
part of this is an uncomfortable conversation. I feel it.
Right.
Because I always feel it. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do it, though. Because it's like, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable because automatically, you know, people don't want to hurt anyone. It's like, I ain't trying to hurt anyone. I just want to live. I'm like, yeah, but we have a culture that was built off of hurting people for centuries, you know? So this ain't about nobody's fault. This ain't about good or bad. This ain't about a solution. This is about what it is.
It's about us talking, and that's part of it, right? I think there's a thing that a lot of people feel. I don't want to speak for all white people because I can't, you know, but that feeling of well, what if I don't say the right thing? I don't want to sound glib, but I think in order to have true, open conversations, you have to be willing to not put your potential embarrassment or discomfort.
Yeah, that's pretty selfish, don't you think? I think that's really fucking selfish. Because the thing is, if you're denying me an opportunity to have the shit hit the fan, that's denying a friendship part of me. Like, in any relationship that you have with a person, and you've got some issues or misunderstanding with that person, you're supposed to go to them and be like, hey, da-da-da-da-da-da. And if that person really loves you and you're your friend, you know, they'll be like, oh, I won't do that anymore, you know? And so, like, when I bring up stuff, it's me saying, hey, da-da-da-da-da, boundaries, you know? And if you really love me, you'd be like, you know what? I don't completely understand anything that you're saying. I don't even feel like what you're saying is right. It's called validation. Now, I learned validation techniques because I was in a relationship with a person who had a very serious personality disorder. And in order to communicate with him, I had to learn some validation techniques. And validation means you don't agree or disagree with this person. You just validate their experience. So when he's like angry, he's not really angry at me. He's just angry because nobody's heard him. And when I started like using these validation techniques of like, I can completely understand how you could be angry about that. And I used it on one of my good friends too here, Dr. Charles Joseph Smith, who has autism. And he calls me very frequently. He calls everybody frequently because he also has bad days. And when he calls me, and I know this validation works really well with people with autism, he calls me and he's like, I'm depressed. I hate myself. He talks about, he gets so depressed. And it's not that I'm trying to fix his problem or help him. I just say, man, that's fucked up. I validate that he's angry. I'm like, he's angry right now. And maybe it's for a reason I don't understand, but you know what? My friend is angry. And I'm just going to sit here and just be like, man, that's fucked up. I'm sorry to hear that. You know, and so like that's all I think that's all that like we can do right now is to validate each other and even validate your uncomfortableness. I understand, Jason, that this makes you some parts of this conversation may make you feel uncomfortable. You know, it may make us feel uncomfortable, but we're going to get through it because now you're going to have an understanding about me and I'm going to have an understanding about you and you'll be more aware. And then we can live on. And if we keep doing that more often, it'll work.
Yeah, I think that's really part of what needs to happen. I'll tell you what I'm personally angry about right now is there's somebody out there with a weed eater that is just like shredding their front lawn, and I'm like, what the fuck? All day long, nothing. And then the second we start recording, somebody's out there. Anyway, whatever.
Only because that's what happens when you do like when you're on the right track.
Exactly, right?
We be calling it what we call it, the devil. I was like, we don't have this conversation whether you like it or not. But
that's right.
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm saying is it's funny. because of the nature of and we talked before we should have just started. I should have started recording everything we said so that everybody could have heard it about social media. But there's a fear among almost everybody that you're going to say something wrong, or you're going to, and I don't mean strictly on a race thing here. I'm saying in general, people are afraid to say the wrong thing.
I feel like say the wrong thing then. And then
that's exactly it, right?
Let the shit hit the fan. Let's let loose. I used to be the same way. I'm avoiding conflict. And I'm like, no, let's let loose. Because what I find is that it just is better. Then you don't have all this pent up oppression. You have to be uncomfortable with being you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. It is not easy. But if you can hone that craft, let me tell you, you can get through anything in life. If you can hone that craft of, you know what, I'm going to sit in my uncomfortability. It don't feel good. I'm going to really look at myself. I'm really going to look in the mirror and be like, yeah, that evil thought, that was me that did that. There's no one else in my head but me. And I think evil thoughts. And then what I want to do? Do I want to stay thinking evil? No, I don't. I don't like thinking evil thoughts. And so I have to I don't like it. Some people like it. Those are called wicked. Now, if you wicked, I'm not saying you can't stop being wicked, but the righteousness will prevail. And a righteous person, here's the definition. Righteousness don't mean you don't fuck up and that you don't do things wrong. No. Righteous means you are uncomfortable when you're doing wrong.
That's right.
You're uncomfortable. He's like, I don't feel right. That is a good sign. If you are doing something wrong and no one can tell you what right or wrong is, you know when you're wrong. You know. You don't need no one to tell you that wasn't a good thing to do. So I'll leave that to other people. I'm not here to boss people's lives. That's one thing I never really liked about church, because they be telling people, don't drink, don't da-da-da. I was like, look, I don't know what people need for their lives.
Me too.
I have no idea, but they know in their heart when something ain't right, and when something is wrong. So
that's right.
Whatever you sitting in, look at yourself and stop being afraid to make a mistake. Let's make mistakes together. Sunrise got that song. If you make a mistake, you did something wrong. Make another mistake and do something right. Make a mistake, you did something wrong. Make another mistake and do something right.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And that's what Sun Ra, he wrote all the time, right? About angels and demons at play, right? We all have to wrestle with the things that are happening inside of us. And some of them feel bad and some of them feel good, but it's all in there.
All you. There's no one else but you.
That's right.
I don't even exist. Like, people think they're so important. Ain't nobody thinking about me. I'm thinking, most people are thinking about themselves 100% of the time. Why? Because it's just you. and everybody that you know is just there for you to figure something out about yourself.
Yeah, whether we know it or not, sometimes we are accidentally maybe conditioned, or maybe on purpose, to think of ourselves as the main character in the movie and everybody else is the supporting cast. I get it.
I do. I mean, but it's true. This is the Angel show. Like, in fact, I've even had like little visions, like when I've had like a really nice day. Like, I remember I was at one apartment. I was walking home. It was a beautiful Chicago day. The breeze was just perfect, and I saw the credits rolling up. Directed by Angel, starring Angel. I made it, Angel. Cinematography, Angel. I saw the
soundtrack by Angel.
And I was just like, and I do that every now and again because it's true. It is just you. That's why you have to be you, because like no one can be Angel but me. No one has my DNA but me. No one has your DNA but you. Why would you want to be anyone else? It is your show, and if I showed up in your show, that's my guest appearance. Guest starring. And you know what? It's an honor to make a guest appearance in people's lives. Start thinking of it that way.
That's true.
It's an honor to be a guest appearance in somebody's life. And if somebody says something like, hey, I listened to your record and it helped me. What an honor. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, Angel, it's been such a great time talking with you. Our time is close up, but before we go, I want to ask you. I played your incredible collaboration with Black Monument Ensemble, now Forever Momentary Space, on my radio show, Range and Basin, and I was curious if it wasn't too much of an ask, if you could tell me about what a forever momentary space might feel like, because at the end of the song, that's you saying that's something you'd achieved, right?
Forever momentary space. It's that everlasting life idea. Like everlasting. I love that idea. That moment, that like those moments that I try to create in my life. See, make your life quality. Don't think about quantity. Make your life quality. Like, make yourself a dinner, but try to be like extra gourmet about it. If it's just you saying you ain't got, and go like get like the freshest ingredients and the most decadent, get some truffle oil, do something, marinate, and then sit down and light some candles. Last night I sat down, I light some candles, and I sat by the window and I ate this delicious meal that I made, and I smoked some weed, and I looked out into the sky sunset, and I was just like, this is life. Quality. This is the richness of life right here. If you start making that a habit, meaning just do it very often, it's very minimal labor. Doesn't take that much. Just takes a little bit of time. And if you start making your life scrumptious like that, then your life will be scrumptious all the time. Everlasting, forever momentary space. And when we were in that garden, I was having a momentary space, meaning I was this was beautiful. It was so beautiful. Because of COVID, we recorded outside at an experimental sound studio, and they have a lovely backyard patio. It's just beautiful with the trees. They had the microphone set up, and we're all there. These are people that I haven't seen in months because of COVID, and we're playing and singing the most beautiful music I've ever heard, because Damon's incredible. Damon, like the coolest dude in the world, is here. All these people are wonderful, and the cicadas are out, and it's that summer Chicago, beautiful summer smell, and I'm like, I cannot believe how blessed I am right now. And so you want to hold on to those, because like right now I can always go back to that space, So now is always now is right now. Make it a habit to make your life juicy. You can do it, and it doesn't cost a lot.
That's right. It's being a kind to yourself that allows you to maybe exist just for a second without thinking about all the other stuff, and just be in that moment. And then it's, I think, maybe surprising how sustaining that is. Your records capture that feel, Angel, and I appreciate you speaking with me about them so honestly and candidly. And I also want to say that just like so many of the great conversations that I've had on this show, it was fun talking with you. It's always fun to be engaging with your work and with your art, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm glad you said fun. You're like psychic or something, man. Like, you really picking up on my vibration. Like, you really picked up on my vibe. Like, everything you said, all the questions you asked, I'm like, yes, that's exactly how I... And fun, the reason I'm saying is because I always tell people, if it's not fun, I'm not going to do it. I'm sorry, y'all, but I don't do boring things. Like, life has to be fun for me. If it's not fun, I'm going to say no. I'm sorry. Actually, I'm not sorry. I gotta have fun.
I forget who said it, but they said, I don't want your revolution if I can't dance, which is a true thing. You know what I mean? Like, this has to be, for me, the reason I like talking about this stuff is because it's joyful to talk about ways that things could be better or less stuck. And nobody makes the world except those of us who are in it, and so we can make it different too if we want to. And I think
it if we try. That's what Slider Family Jones said. And when you said joy, enlightenment. I honor Sun Ra on the beginning track of the live album. I do enlightenment, and he says the sound of joy is enlightenment.
Yeah,
the sound of joy. We have to seek joy. Make your life joyful. And if we do that, we'll be fine. Okay? Just do that. You don't have to figure out all this other stuff. Just try to find some way to make your life enjoyable.
Yeah.
That doesn't harm you or others.
Exactly. Well, your records help on that front, Angel. Thank you so much for taking the time. I'm so glad that we were able to make this happen.
Yeah, me too.
That's going to do it for this week's show. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Jason Woodbury. I write, produce, and host the show. Our audio is edited by Andrew Horton. Sarah Goldstein and Johnathan Mark Walls do design for the program, and I want to extend a big thank you to each one of them. Our executive producer and top of the show announcement is Aquarium Drunkard founder Justin Gage. On the recommendation front, before I head out, I'd suggest you check out the new album by Flock of Dimes, featuring former Transmissions guest Jen Wasner. It's called Head of Roses, and I am obsessed especially with the second song on it. It's called Price of Blue. So give that a spin. It's this ragged guitar thing that gets transmuted into this glorious, hyper-colored pop creation. It's really daring, and nobody is doing it the way Jen is doing it. So check that out. We will be back next Wednesday with another all-new talk, another strange conversation for these strange times. I'll be joined by country singer Al Riggs. Keep yourself safe until then, and we will speak soon.